One of the hardest questions to answer when playing Ace against the new Op14 blue-yellow boa actually comes off as deceptively simple. Should I swing at their life or not? Because against boa, attacking the wrong thing at the wrong time doesn't just lose you tempo, it can potentially lose you the whole game. In this video, I want to talk through my entire process for solving this matchup. The strategies I tested, why some of them failed, and the lines I ultimately landed on if I were to compete in a tournament tomorrow. Boa's game plan against Ace is very clear. Force Ace to 0, and then close out the game with Pudding and Perfume Femur. The first conclusion I reach very quickly is that attacking Kuja Pirate characters is not an option. Anytime you swing into a Kuja Pirate, you're forced to take a life as long as they have a Dawn on Boa leader, and that is far too punishing in a matchup where their main goal is to take all of your life, because they have such a substantial lethal with 9-cost Boa and Perfume Femur. Taking that one life opens the door for them to be able to really pressure you with a bunch of follow-up swings and then close out the game with 1 or 2 9-cost boas before they use their combos of Pudding and Perfume Femur. The only characters I'm really willing to attack, unless I'm already at 0 life and mainly just hoping that they don't have a Femur, are Rayleigh or Kuma, because they're not Kuja Pirates and thus do not force me to take a life. So I know that most of my swings will not be going at their characters and thus will have to go at life, and I have to consider exactly how to approach this considering that Boa's main gimmick is triggers. I tested 3 main approaches. The first option was to just swing at their life every turn like you typically would in a normal matchup. At first, this felt very strong. Most of Boa's triggers are just 5k bodies, which need a Dawn in order to be able to threaten Ace or most of its characters. That Dawn commitment will hurt their curve, and a couple of extra 6k swings really aren't that scary considering Ace's high counter density. And there's always the best case scenario, sometimes their life just isn't a trigger. As long as their first life wasn't Gorgon Sisters, this strategy won almost every single time. But if their first life was Gorgon Sisters and I swung at it on my second turn, I lost every single time. Gorgon Sisters is the single most important card in this matchup. It turns all of their 5,000 bodies into 6,000 bodies without a Dawn commitment, which dramatically influences how well they can apply early pressure while still playing their characters on curve. Because Gorgon Sisters is a 6-cost, Ace is not able to answer it until its 6 or 7 Dawn turn with a Jozu, or in much weaker scenarios with a Red Rock. And you can't ever clear the Gorgon Sisters by attacking it because of course that would force you to take a life and you'd fall into the predicaments outlined earlier. As Boa players realize how important First Life Gorgon Sisters is, they're going to adapt and increase their Hiyori and Grandma counts in order to play those on their second turn and always be able to swap their first life, always threatening most likely a Gorgon Sisters. With the consistency of Gorgon Sisters being stacked as the first life, swinging on your first turn became an unreasonable option. You can make the choice to gamble that their first life isn't a Gorgon Sisters if they didn't play a Hiyori or a Grandma, but ultimately, if it is a Gorgon Sisters, you have to understand just how severe that punishment is. It often decides the game as early as your second turn. The only time I would take the gamble at all is if I didn't have a Jozu follow-up for my 6 or 7 Dawn turn, because that means that I'm not going to be able to remove it from board regardless, and I'd rather just hope that they don't have a Gorgon Sisters in order to already start putting pressure on their life. The second option I tested was the opposite extreme. Never swing at their life at all. The idea is to clear Rayleighs and Kumas while establishing a board full of Marco blockers and 10-cost new gates. You want to be using Marco blocker as frequently as you possibly can so that you can refresh your hand and avoid ever taking any life, so that you can remain healthy enough to establish a threatening board of new gates that can finish the game in 1 turn. In theory, this sounds really strong, and generating an unbreakable wall is a really fun way to play Ace, but 9-cost Boa ultimately makes this not feasible. It forces you onto a clock. Eventually, going to 0 life becomes inevitable, and the only way you survive at 0 is if their board is completely cleared and you're able to counter out of a 15k unblockable swing from leader. Sometimes you're forced into positions such as these, and you just have to hope that they don't have pudding, or they don't have femur, or potentially, if you have enough counter, they don't have the combo of both. This made it clear that pure board control and establishing a wall was not a legitimate strategy. What I ultimately landed on is a dynamic strategy. I make my decisions based on my hand, the board state, and most importantly, the consequences of Boa's potential triggers. My goal is to push the game as long as possible in order to move towards a clean and structured lethal. Most of the time, this means I don't swing at their first life until I feel comfortable to play a Jozu to bounce the Gorgon Sisters back to their hand. This usually happens on 6 or 7 Dawn. Typically, on your 7 Dawn turn, they will have a Kuma and maybe a 4-cost character if you didn't bounce it with Atmos. I like to swing at their life here, and if they trigger a Gorgon Sisters, I'll play Jozu and bounce it. If they fail to trigger a Gorgon Sisters, I'll oftentimes Red Rock the Kuma. This is possible because of the higher 3 or 4 Red Rock counts that Aceless are playing now. The Kuma is a more threatening body than anything they can trigger other than Gorgon Sisters because of its 7k stat line, meaning that for 1 Dawn, it's going to ask for 2 cards. But of course, it's also preferable to establish a body like Jozu. The issue in this matchup with Jozu is that it's not as effective as it oftentimes can be because they have such an effective way to remove it with Rayleigh. Sometimes my hand can even lead me towards taking different choices than bouncing their Gorgon Sisters on 6 or 7 with my Jozu. Sometimes I have the opportunity to establish a really wide board that can gain me a lot of value. And this is best exemplified with the new addition to Ace, Cavendish. I really like Cavendish. I'm currently running 4 copies, and it is extremely helpful outside of the matchups that were really prevalent last format, like Ace, Emu, and Zoro. Those matchups all kind of invalidated Cavendish because they're able to so effectively remove him right afterwards. Boa is able to remove Cavendish with Rayleigh, but they're not able to do that on their 5 Dawn turn, and oftentimes Boa is only even playing 2 Rayleigh. And one of the things about Rayleigh is that it's not a Kuma, which is a little bit more threatening by allowing them to survive for significantly longer, making you have to stall even longer. Sometimes, because of my high Cavendish count, if I have 2 Cavendish, I'll consider playing a Cavendish on 4 Dawn and a Cavendish on 6 Dawn and not swinging at all, because this in turn facilitates the potential to play an 8-cost event then and play out Newgate. And with both of your Cavendish swings and your Newgate, you're going to swing 6, 8, 8, and draw 6 cards and trash 3, which is just a really effective cycle to get your hand super huge, and it puts them into a little bit of a conundrum because they can't effectively both pudding and Rayleigh away your Cavendishes at the same time. So it makes pudding a lot less effective, because if they pudding you, you're just able to draw the cards right back with the Cavendishes that are also protected behind the Newgate. So that's an example of a more dynamic play where I'm not just going to simply play a 4-cost on 4 and then Jozu on 6. One of the most important features of making this longer, more consistent strategy work is heavily protecting your first life. We know that we have to play around Boa's number 1 goal of forcing Ace to 0 and then using pudding and perfume femur. By protecting the first life so heavily, it makes it a lot more difficult for them to put you to 0 because they're not able to complete their traditional formula of swing enough that they take their first life and then play 2 9-cost Boas before you femur them into oblivion. Sometimes they'll even swing 10 on their 5 Dawn turn, and if I have a Marco on field from my 4 Dawn turn, I'll just block and draw the 2 cards. Otherwise, I'll allow myself to go down to 2 because them not establishing a body on 5 is a really big deal because it allows me to swing at their first life with almost no consequence because I just am able to bounce whatever it is and leave their board at 0. This matchup isn't particularly about being aggressive or passive, it's about considering how many turns triggers from Boa might cost you, and how much closer it pushes them towards their goals of Perfume Femur. Every swing into Boa's life has consequences, and the better you understand these consequences, the better you understand how to mitigate Boa's potential. If you're preparing for nationals or other tournaments, I recommend practicing this matchup a lot because of the importance of being dynamic and understanding how important it is to make unique decisions on each of your turns. If this breakdown was helpful, let me know what matchup you'd like to see next.